Do I do the hello and welcome to?
I can do it if you want. Well, I don't know which. Are we swapping or? Are we
I don't know. I think I did it last time, but then my memory's fallible, so
I can go for it then.
I don't really like doing it. You see,
do you not?
It feels really unnatural.
It does, doesn't it? I don't know why. I think is it because nobody's here? If I was actually talking to someone, then I would say hello, wouldn't I? I would be like, oh, hi everyone.
It's the anticipation of hopefully there being an audience. So.
Hello, if anybody is out there.
Okay, so what's this podcast called?
Chats over coffee with my yoga teacher. And I am the yoga teacher.
And I am the student / stand-up comedian as well.
Yeah, enjoy.
Do we say our names?
Oh, Kayla. My name is Kayla.
And mine's Peter.
Anyway, this podcast is going out in March, right?
So
have you got anything going on at the beginning of March that you want to tell people about?
No. I am busy.
Check website for tour dates kind of thing.
I'm doing a couple of gigs for the RAF, actually. That's interesting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Any fighter squadrons that are listening, then get yourself down to RAF Cranwell or RAF Cosford. I'm going to have to set myself a target to do something more exciting.
Yeah, so that you have something to tell people about.
So I can be like, oh, well, I am actually doing this bungee jump. What are you doing in March?
So, my Balance Your Digestion group coaching course, I'm actually going to close the doors for it in March. So by the end of March, if you've not signed up, you've missed it. Even though it's not going to start till May, I've decided I'm going to give myself some time to put the course together bespoke for the people who have signed up. So if you're interested, you sign up by the end of March. We'll have lots of discussions in April, and then we'll actually start it in May. So that's exciting.
And you've got your regular classes and all that stuff as well. So.
And yes, I have all my regular yoga classes online and in person. And I will be starting a new class as well in person. I'm afraid it is a private. It's at an apartment complex in Leeds called The Junction. So if you happen to be at The Junction, then you can come. But it is a private class for the residents there. So if you're not from there, then you can't come. Sorry.
All right, well, there's a 0.05% chance that was a relevant message to somebody then. And obviously contact both got websites and contact via there or Instagram, and that's all linked below, so do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a joke I wrote that I don't think is going to work on stage. So I went on some training recently, right, to learn how to do resuscitation, but I went and it was just loads and loads of stuff about how great whales and the ocean and water is. Turns out it was actually a CPR course.
That wasn't too bad.
That's a CSEAPR course. Yeah.
Yep. I think it works.
I don't think it does.
Maybe a dad joke. It's a bit of a dad joke, maybe. You know what I mean?
Sometimes I write stupid jokes. Because I have another one here. I hate the letter N.
Okay.
Because it always has to be at the centre of attention. That's naff, innit? That's
That works better written, I think. Who do you sell Christmas cracker jokes to? Maybe you should list all of these up and send them off to that person.
Do you remember the adverts for the 118 guys that you used to ring up the directory to get a number for anybody?
Yeah.
And there was these two irritating guys in running gear that had moustaches. When that started up, there was an advert going out for silly one-line jokes because they were doing a thing where you could text joke to that number and then they would send you a joke, so they just needed loads of jokes.
Loads of those kind of quick one-liney
so those stupid jokes, not necessarily Christmas. So I think I sold one to them.
Oh. Did they want more or?
No, I sent loads, but they only wanted one.
Oh, right, okay. Okay.
And that was, what do you call a monkey covered in egg whites?
What?
A orangutan.
That's really cute. I like that.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that or whether I've just signed the rights away.
I know, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I read a book, didn't I?
Yes.
God, so long though. I started it, and any time I mentioned that I was reading this book to someone and how difficult it was, everyone was just like, why'd you put yourself through it? And I sort of thought, well, why do anything difficult? I mean,
True.
Why run a marathon? It's not easy, is it? But things can be worthwhile. It's when something's like I read the second book by Joseph Heller in about July, wrote Catch-22. and that's like a masterpiece and stuff. But I'd never read the second book, and like it's not that well thought of. And I thought, well, you know, it must be all right. And I thought it was really boring, and I didn't really enjoy it. And that was 500 pages and took a while. And I did feel like it probably wasn't really worth it. But I was actually getting something out of that philosophy book.
And what did you read then?
So I read Iris Murdoch's philosophy book called Metaphysics as a Guide to Morals. Firstly, it was written as if I was an intelligent person, which is very difficult to... I'm not saying I'm not necessarily, but the language is somewhat academic in such a way that I think it presupposed that I knew a little bit more about Kierkegaard and Kant than I actually did. Is it Kant or Kant?
I have no idea. I was going to ask you what you were saying. You're just saying random words now.
They're names of philosophers, right? So
yeah.
So it was
I assumed there were names.
It's just an exploration of starting from Plato, really going up to some postmodern bloke. What's his name? Derrida, Jacques Derrida. And I don't know. I would do it such an injustice talking about all the themes, really. To be honest, I don't really know what the word metaphysics means. I kind of think I know what it means, but to me it's like something that is sort of an intangible middle place between thought and...
Well, that's actually really good according to what Google's telling me.
Okay, what does Google say?
Google says, metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality, the first principles of being, identity and change, space and time, causality, necessity, and possibility.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously it goes on a little bit more.
Yeah. In a nutshell.
Yeah. In a nutshell. In like a wiki nutshell. The fundamental nature of reality. That kind of makes sense.
So there's a thing that she keeps mentioning it about Plato saying that things are derived... He doesn't call it a god, but he says things are derived from this higher sort of idea of the good, and that we can all kind of... The more knowledge that we get makes us more... Almost as if we're saying the more rational that we get, the closer that we come to the good. So it's very... I don't know if that gets sort of supplanted, I guess, by Christian ideas and stuff, because the good gets replaced by God and stuff, I suppose. But I think Iris Murdoch's kind of exploring, well, what happens now that we live in a society where we're quite secular and we remove that thing and then we become quite scientific, and then does anything replace that in our heads? Like, do we start feeling religious about other things, but will we be getting rid of throwing the baby out with the bathwater type thing, getting rid of a lot of these ideals because we don't feel like they mean anything? But then also, do we actually genuinely do feel things like love and all that stuff, like that, you know, is on a layer that isn't necessarily a scientific layer in some respects? So it's kind of exploring all that, really.
So was the book talking about like ethics, as in like how you treat like other people and things like that, or was it a bit higher up than that even?
Well,
you know, like that kind of, was it like a moral rightness or a correctness, you know, talking about like specific actions? Or,
well, I think she was being romantic in terms of like wanting to look back at old-fashioned ideas of what is good and not losing that.
Almost nostalgic.
Yes, yeah, I think so. She was trying to like drag us back to it, and almost like she was having a go at a lot of postmodern thought, and actually art as an extension of thought. Because a lot of the ideas of postmodern art is to try and, well, recreate what human beings are in some respects. And she was kind of scared by that, I think.
I've always thought that, like, when you talk about, like, ethics and morals and stuff like that, it's about, like, maybe, like, a deep-rooted sense of respect or something. Maybe if that's a way of thinking about it. Like, you know, rather than it being specifically related to maybe individual actions, you know, saying, like, you know, when someone does this, they are bad. It could be more like, well, in this scenario, that action would be bad, but in this scenario, that action is absolutely fine. You know, so it's hard to, like, be specific, because
like
there
lying,
would be...
you mean?
Potentially lying, that's usually a one that people bring up. But even other things, like having multiple partners, you know, if you're you know, that way inclined and everybody's knows about it, then in that situation, it's fine. If you're, you know, not that, you know, if someone else doesn't know about it, you're keeping secrets, you're lying, then in that situation is bad, you know. So it's like, you know, there's lots of kind of morals behind it that could potentially be right in some situations and wrong in others. Where you could say, like, in a religion, it's all bad, always, constantly. You know, there would be no okayness, you know, no sex outside of marriage, for instance, or something like that. Whereas, like, in a more secular thing, you could say, like, well, there's scenarios where it would be okay and scenarios where it wouldn't. But it all stems back from that idea of, like, respect, right? Or love, even, or kindness, something like that, maybe.
If you were, like, going to write the Bible for someone to follow and stuff, you wouldn't put so many caveats in, would you, as to how people were supposed to... You wouldn't go, oh, well, in this circumstances. And I guess it's a general... It is a general rule, isn't it? You can't say, oh, yeah, but for the polyamorous is all right.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about whether there's a, like, inherent morality to, like, a lot of human behaviour. Like, I know there is an altruistic nature to humans, obviously. Like, it's uncomfortable to watch another human being suffer, isn't it? We don't want them to, so we would alleviate that. Why did that happen in the first? Because altruism's not something that happens in every single species, is it?
Yeah, like if you're saying, like, if that makes us special or whatever, why?
So is that an evolutionary thing? Is it actually, like, better to work together, and so the people that felt like they wanted to work together because they were upset, and it's like an evolutionary trait?
Yeah, most likely. I think that's what most kind of, like, psychology kind of scientists would have probably agree with, that we are communal species. That would
sort of account for a lot of moral behaviour. So when you get, like, a religious code, like, do unto others and such, that is humans would do kind of in general feel that way anyway, unless you're a psychopath.
But then I suppose you're talking about something that's very obvious or very physical, whereas, like, we could be very manipulative and just, like, almost like you almost think like there's you know, like a victimless crime or something like that, you know, almost like where it's like, well, this is going to get me to the top, and okay, maybe a couple people will get a little bit stepped on, but it's not too bad, you know, and it's all like, especially in this day and age, it's not in your face, you know, it's not like, oh, for me to become chief, I have to kill this guy or something. It's not that obvious, you know, it's not that emotional anymore. So I think maybe in that way, religions go a bit broader so that you can cover more more scenarios maybe. But I thought it was interesting. I did just a little bit of a search just on morals and ethics. I mean, like, teeny tiny search. But one thing that I came across, which I thought was quite interesting, was the idea of ethics being governed by a sense of shame, which I hadn't really thought about. But I suppose it's like, if you feel shame, then that tells you you've done something wrong. But I've never really...
Why do you feel shame then?
Well, like, because you've killed someone or something. I don't know.
If you didn't think you would be judged for that, would you feel shame for it? Or
I think so.
Yeah?
I think so. I think you would
no
still
one was
feel
ever
bad.
Gonna know
coming back
about
to
it.
That altruism. You know, coming back to that.
If you wanted an affair, right, and no one would ever know about it, and no one would ever get hurt, would you feel bad about doing it? Was the thing that's worse is the fact that you hurt someone if they found out?
What does your book say?
Iris Murdoch had loads of affairs. In fact, her husband, she pretty much never slept with, really. And he would just, like, he said that he found sex an absurd, ridiculous thing. And she would just, like, go off with a load of other people all the time.
So was that an agreed thing then?
I think so, yeah.
He was weird?
I think it was an agreed thing, yeah. So.
All right, well.
Kind of strange. Do as I say, not as I do, sort of. Well, she wasn't saying... Well, she wasn't necessarily championing monogamy in any sense. But I have heard, like, some recently about how, you know, monogamous societies tend to be much more successful ones than other ones, like ones with harems and stuff like that.
I think a lot of the problem is with, like, the non-monogamy or like, you know, having polyamorous lots of partners or whatever. It's just, if you are talking about a lineage and the woman was having multiple partners, there's no way, especially back in the day, maybe nowadays obviously, but not back in the day, of telling whose child the baby is. So unless you had a matriarchal society, it would be very bad. Because you wouldn't be able to figure out whose child it was. So a lot of the time, there's kind of like
we've got Jeremy Kyle now, though. So,
well, I just mean like, yeah. Well, what I just mean is like it seems really like sexist against women, like because at the time, you know, men could do something and they wouldn't necessarily be done for it, but women would be very, you know, could be even imprisoned and things if you go back far enough for having multiple relationships, especially if they were in a marriage or something like that. But I think it stems from a very practical point of view because obviously the woman is the one that has the child. So there's no way of there's, if you know you've only been with one person, then you know whose baby it is.
Well, that's a thing, that there's obviously a spectrum of behaviours in this, but I've been reading like a woman that talks about sexual difference and stuff, and there's a general like some women do like having multiple partners and stuff, but that's generally something that men like more than women like, and a lot of that would be because women become more selective over their sexual partners because they know that they're the ones that have to bear a child if there is a result to that, whereas men can just be like, go and impregnate. Like, I think, isn't Elon Musk want to impregnate as many people as possible? I'm sure I've heard that.
I don't know. It sounds awful.
It's obviously there's a spectrum of behaviours, but it's usually men that want to have like more and more sexual partners and variety of sexual partners and variety of whatever. Usually. It doesn't mean women don't like sex or that some women aren't interested in that. But
definitely, I could see that playing at least a part in it.
One measure of data that sort of backs up some of those things is that they now analyse a lot of dating app data. So they basically know like how interested. Like, obviously, men will have lower standards than they're just they go for anything. But women are generally more selective.
But yeah, I thought the idea of talking about shame was an interesting take on it, like feeling shame for when you do something bad, like when you hurt people or something like that. And that's your guide.
But why do you feel that though? And why do you just like...
Yeah, but why do you like people? You're saying that kind of altruism based on evolution is it just not the opposite, in a sense, the opposite feeling?
I've read in several places that gossip, which we think of as quite a malicious thing to do a lot of the time, is something that's also something we've evolved to do. Because if you're in tribes of, I think we were traditionally in like tribes of like 50 people or something, gossip was a useful way of like weeding out who the person you can't trust is, because did you hear so and so? Don't give your nuts to them and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that potentially in those sorts of situations is not an immoral thing, but we don't tend to think of gossip as being a virtue, do we?
Not normally. But then like you're talking about stuff that's so old, because obviously like in yoga philosophy,
we made it.
Yay! So like in yoga philosophy, obviously they cover certain morals or ethics or whatever you kind of label you want to call them. At the very least, you can talk about it in the yamas. So you've got your non-harming, your truthfulness, so like don't hurt anyone, don't lie. Almost like the Ten Commandments. Non-stealing, don't take what isn't yours. A new one that you don't really find in the more Christian side is the right use of the energy. So brahmacharya, and potentially you could link that to sexual energy. And then a parigraha, which is like non-hoarding or, non-attachment, trying not to be so attached to possessions and things. But I do think like those things are 5,000 years old. So surely the world was different when those kind of like little guidelines were laid out. Which
10,000 years is since agriculture, isn't it?
That sounds about right.
And that is the big social shift, isn't it? From moving from tribal societies into these larger ones. And it goes back to the Hobbesian idea of like life in tribes. The Hobbes idea is life in tribes back then was nasty, brutish and short. That's what he said. So when societies like had someone in charge of larger areas, because you've got agriculture, you can trade, you've got these bigger societies, you need rules and the hierarchy and punishment to keep things in control. And so those rules and religious rules and like laws are all kind of similar things. It's just obviously like, I suppose if ostensibly it's less political, like to have religious rules rather than ones coming from the guy in charge.
Yeah, because then he can just be like, it's not me.
And obviously there's an overlap, obviously, because people use religion in those situations, but bigger societies need rules, otherwise it's chaos. Because we've all got a line of good and evil in us, and you need to be deterred from the negative things that you might do if you could get away with it, and incentivized to do the nice things. We know that we can err, because to err is the human.
That I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that would make sense, because I think the other thing as well is like when people do something that's like wrong, we would say wrong, like murder or something. If we didn't have these rules, then it would spiral, because you would feel justified in your response, in your feelings, in your actions that you would take out of that. Like I would say like maybe Old Testament style, he killed your brother, well, you can kill him and his brother. I don't know, that kind of thing. It's like ridiculous. So like obviously with, in this day and age, having someone like, the police or something like that actually come in, reprimand, make sure, crimes were committed in the way that we think they were, things like that, all the judicial process that we've put together now as a society, it stops the spiral out of control. It stops you from taking your own personal vengeance, if you want to call it that, or action or whatever, depending on how bad the action is. If you know that someone's done something that's illegal, you won't just do the illegal thing back at them. You'll take it to the appropriate authorities so that person can be reprimanded or punished or whatever. In theory, all in theory. And then potentially that stops, anarchy in a sense.
Have you ever seen stuff about the Second World War when things just become kind of lawless? You see the chaos that ensues then, and like the malign activity of men, like soldiers that have free reign of areas and stuff. Then you see that sort of thing. I'm a Hobbes guy, I think. I'm on Team Hobbes rather than Team Rousseau, in the very simplistic viewing of it anyway. There used to be a podcast I used to listen to called Talking Politics, which I thought used to be really, really good, and they've stopped doing it now. But they did a talk on the history of political ideas, and so they did one on Hobbes and one on Rousseau, and they kind of like used them as like two counter sort of, like a lot of conservatives quite like Hobbes because he's sort of like, we need laws and we're imperfect and we need deterrence and incentives and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of people on the left like Rousseau, because Rousseau has this idea of, before societies, we were just like free and easy and like loved each other on the land and stuff. And then societies came along and they're the evil things and we need to free the individual. And I think that is woefully naive, but...
Yes. Okay, I'm glad we agree on that.
but I'm more left-wing than right-wing, so like what I think anyway. I mean, who knows? Everyone's changing the goalposts as to what it means to be left and right-wing these days. Doesn't mean anything half the time. But I may have straw-manned Rousseau's arguments there. But one thing I did find interesting is when, in that lecture series, they were talking about how Hobbes's idea of mankind is kind of quite negative in some ways, because it's sort of like, we're quite bad and we need to be sort of given rules and controlled because we've got negative instincts. And he actually was supposed to be a very, very nice man.
Yeah.
And so it's always like, at heart, we're like... we need to be freed and have our individual goodness come out and blah, 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 blah. And apparently he was like a bit of a dick and a philanderer.
Well, there you go. So he wanted to be free so he could be a dick.
There we go, exactly, yeah. I think it's very much a crossover with a lot of left-wing blokes that pretend to be feminists these days because they want to get their end away, I think.
I do have one more thought on this kind of topic. Do you think that like ethics and morals include non-humans?
I listened to a podcast with Martha Nussbaum the other day talking about this very thing and about how we have a human-centric view of the world in terms of the way we treat other animals. Obviously we do. We wouldn't farm
to some
them
extent that's natural.
to see ourselves as the ones that are in charge of it and stuff. But you mean the treatment of animals rather than the way animals treat each other?
Not just animals, anything.
Okay.
Like plants are alive. The earth, ecosystems. I mean, now we can look at it from a scientific point of view and go, don't do that because, we need that to live. But like from like an ethics or moral point of view, do we feel any sort of shame or remorse for the removal of ancient woodlands or ancient trees? You're not just like killing a chicken because you want some chicken to eat, but like more than that,
So here's what I would why I would think that we think the way we do. So we used to, and obviously people still do it, but we used to other more humans that weren't like us than we do now.
We noticed the differences and used to separate. Is that what you mean? Sort
of. So instead of having a common humanity for when we colonized Africa and stuff and the South American like tribes and stuff, we didn't see them as equal to us on a level that we thought that they were as not maybe dignified as humans. They weren't. We thought we were better humans than them. Okay.
Yeah.
And as a general trend, we've widened the circle of empathy with human beings as time's gone on. I would think, in that we would not.
I would agree. That makes sense. I would agree with that
so much now, and that circle has also probably covers animals that we co-evolved alongside, like domesticated animals as well. And maybe the great apes, because maybe we sort of see that they're intelligent and similar to us somewhat. And maybe dolphins and elephants and like very evolved primates and stuff. Not primates, mammals. I think it comes down to like if we saw an elephant suffering or something, we would feel bad. But we might not feel as bad if we saw a wasp suffering.
I think that comes back to maybe a little bit of, you know, you're saying about increasing knowledge potentially could increase your moral compass or something like that. You said it better, but
I don't usually say it better, I don't think. But
I think maybe you touched a point there, because if you knew what it looked like for a wasp to be suffering, like if you knew what it looked like for, like, you know, they've done studies on the bees who have been in insecticides and they get sick and they do this weird thing where they do this weird move. They walk around in a weird circle and then they kind of look confused and dazed, but you wouldn't know that if no one told you. You would just be like, oh, there's a bee walking around. Like, you wouldn't think about it. But like, maybe the more we increase our knowledge, the more we can see that they're suffering, and then we know that it's a sign of suffering. Like, maybe because it's not the way we would show it, we can't immediately feel it, but once you increase your knowledge, there's a chance that once you recognize suffering, you would feel bad.
But I guess the thing with bees as well is that I would not kill a bee in the house, because I know that the bees are in trouble, and so you know, I'd feel bad about killing one. So
again, it's that's a way of increasing knowledge in a sense, but I suppose that's more from a global point of view rather than an individual.
It's not because of the suffering.
Yes, yeah. It's not from the suffering of that bee.
If I'm going to kill it, it's just going to be whack, gone. I mean, that's the way I want to go.
I want a giant alien with a fly swatter, whack,
exactly,
gone.
Yeah.
Splat.
I know they say when you spray insects, that's a really horrible way for an insect to die, isn't it?
Yeah,
so I guess maybe it would be quite sort of, but it's just harder to feel the empathy with the suffering of things that are much less like us.
But what I'm saying is, like, even if they really, really don't look like us, would the knowledge bring that feeling? If someone said when they wiggle their legs like this and do 3 taps, they're in so much pain they think they're going to die, and they're warning other bugs to stay away, would any empathy kind of show itself? If someone explained it to you like that, you know what I mean?
It just is harder to put yourself in that place, isn't it, really, I think?
Yeah, I know, like, insects have such short lifespans as well. That probably doesn't help.
Yeah, maybe
because they do only live for a few days and things like that. Some insects don't live very long at all. So that could potentially...
I mean, you said plants earlier. I mean, it's harder to put yourself in that place as well. I mean, the concept of a plant suffering is very, like... That's just so alien.
Yeah, but then... Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? Because obviously... Yeah, because I suppose, like, other things, they won't be suffering, in a sense, in the more traditional sense, like we would, because they don't have the same kind of nervous system and network and brain and things that we have, so they won't be suffering in the way we would describe it. But all plants know when they've been damaged and react accordingly. But like we said before when we were talking about consciousness, that's probably more a chemical reaction based on exposure to oxygen and stuff in the air, rather than like a conscious choice to protect the damaged area. But then if you add more and more knowledge to your life about the effects, or, you know, even just something as simple as knowing that if you remove that tree, you will never be able to replace it, and even your grandchildren will struggle to replace it because it will take, 200 years to put that ancient tree back. And so maybe that could, in a sense, is enough to bring about a sense of almost like loss rather than suffering.
It's almost as if Plato was right about the more knowledge you have, the closer you get to the good.
Maybe. But I'm not sure we've found the perfect society. It might be a bit nice, but it's a bit destructive. We're on a path to disaster.
There we go. What, because of Brexit?
Yes, just because of Brexit. It's a hard one, because I feel like our society of consumerism was never going to be okay. The way our business models of literally perpetual growth forever. It's never going to, like, why would you even think that would work? Not when we're global,
I found out that the phrase late stage capitalism is like so old. And people use it. Sorry?
What does that mean? What's
well,
that?
people often say, "Oh, we're in late stage capitalism," as if like, it's going to end. I don't know if it's a Marxist phrase or not, but it's
Right.
It's used as a phrase to sort of talk about how this is not sustainable and the model has to change or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But people have been using that phrase for like 100 years or something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
capitalism often finds a way to renew itself and stuff. I mean, I'm not like a fan of consumerism really or anything, but the reason that it works is because it has like clocked into human beings' want to provide and ingenuity and the engine of that so that we want to incentivize human ingenuity into a society, and capitalism does do that to some degree.
But I think the problem is just a few bad decisions that we're struggling to let go of, or something like that, you might say. Or, like, for example, like the idea of just, change fashion and clothes. The way, like if you go back a couple hundred years, women would have 3 or 4 dresses, and that would be it. And you don't need any more. And unless something like really important came up and you needed a new dress, a king's ball or something, like you just wouldn't get a new dress. You would just have what you have. And people would recognize you based on your clothes because you would be wearing the same dress every other day. And you would have multiple layers, so the outer dress is the dirty one, but maybe you have skirts and shifts and all this. I mean, I'm just saying, like, the fashion was built around it. The fashion was built around having one and then some layers, and maybe 2, fancy one for Sunday and a not so fancy one for the rest of the week or for working in or something like that. But even if we don't go that specific with things, the fashion industry does market and capitalize on people's desire to fit in, to look good, to blah blah, sell, especially beauty, marketing, creams, makeup, it's all like the marketing side of it is a little bit dodgy. That the objects themselves aren't necessarily bad, but the idea that you have to get a new jacket every winter because you're not going to be in fashion if you don't or something sounds ridiculous.
So I would say that I agree with that, and I would say that I'm not waving the flag for capitalism here, but I'm saying that capitalism works because it harnesses aspects of human beings that allow us to create and build and progress and stuff, and it's whatever. But it also preys on negative things within the human psyche as well to justify the business model.
Because I feel like, in terms of like, I don't know, let's just say use the coat as an example. Maybe you could get a coat that would last you 10 years or 20 years even, or something like that.
Well, I do. I don't buy new coats all the time. I mean,
I think my coat's at least 14 years old. Because I bought it when I first moved over here.
Mine's 15 years old, so what are you going to do about that?
But I mean, like, if, for instance, we were actually still progressing in, I don't know, the technology of coats, you might be really tempted to buy a new coat that is better, that is actually warmer or lighter or better for your life, So, and then that way you'd be like, well, what do I do with my old coat? There's nothing wrong with it, but this one is better. So I definitely get the idea of progression, like, as an incentive for
phones are the worst thing for that, aren't they?
consumerism.
Just like a new one every year, innit? And you just think,
Yeah.
I always think like phones are always like sitting on new technology. They know what the one after and the one after is going to be already, probably, before they bring out so you think, well, you could just bring out
I feel like, I don't know if you think this, but I feel like a lot of things within the last, like, say, 5 years have been gimmicks rather than actual, like, hardware improvements, if that makes sense. It's more just like, this phone has this really good micro camera. Look how good I can take a picture of this ant. It's like, what? Is that a thing?
If you did, you might have more empathy for ants, though.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe I need that. It's a funny balance. Because I think you're right. It does kind of bring about a sense of, like, wanting to improve, wanting to grow, and consumerism does kind of allow for that to happen. But I suppose it's all about finding that balance. Yeah,
it's difficult, isn't it? Because I guess it's just let off the leash, isn't it? To a degree, people are free to just buy as many coats as they want, so why wouldn't they?
Well, they shouldn't, because, we come back to Perigraha, non-attachment. Don't buy a million coats.
That's why you need the rules in there, because because otherwise people could do what they want. So people need...
And then we go back to Plato's knowledge, because you need the knowledge. to be able to make appropriate decisions. If you know that your coat is, plastic, and as soon as you let it go, it's going to go into a landfill and just sit there forever, then maybe your decision will change and you won't buy a coat every year. You'll buy a coat every 15 years or 20 years. And
you can spend all your money going to yoga classes or comedy nights.
Yeah, who wants
worthwhile
a coat when you can do yoga instead? A non-consumable consumerism? Is that? Can you say that?
So we say thanks for listening now?
Yeah, thank you. It is nice to know that people listen. I have had a few people come up, not come up to me, but come up to me virtually. Is that how, can you say that? And say that, yeah.
Oh, good. Well, no one's telling me that, but I mean, so...
I'm sorry, no one's telling you that.
But then you're probably the one that people would interact with more, I think, on the front of you. You're offering things, whereas I'm just like carting myself around the country for 20 minutes in like more and more obscure places. So why is anybody going to get...
If someone came up to you on stage and was like, can I just interrupt you for a minute? I just want to tell you how much I like your podcast. It would be a little bit weird.
That has happened when I've got off stage. That has not happened.
Oh, okay.
No one shouts it out on stage. No one's like, hey, you're the guy. So, well, I'm glad that someone has been in touch then.
When you watch a new podcast, do you only listen to the most recent one?
My experience of looking at it is that people listen to the most recent one or the oldest one.
Oh.
And then I think if they like it, they will dip in a bit or go backwards.
Yeah.
So if you've only listened to this one, there's loads. They're all relevant. Just nothing's... Yeah. It's not a political show, so like everything's seemingly relevant until they bring out scientific knowledge to show that all of your stuff about the glutes was like old science now. But
yeah. And I'll have to do what they do on like QI and go, well, back in episode 17, I said this, and then someone's written in, and now I need to correct it. But until that happens, it's all right.